one thing that I do think will be fun for us and potentially fun for those that interact with us is a discussion on books that we think are going to stand the test of the time and books that aren't.
Yeah, right. So books that are going to get better with age, like fine wine. This idea of the verses, this book versus that book, and there's going to be, I think, some different iterations of this. Both some older books that have already had a little bit of test of time put to them, new books versus new books, and then some out of the same genre, maybe. I was thinking, not necessarily like something along the lines of Dracula versus Salem's Lot, but you could talk about a Salem's Lot versus, say, a Twilight novel that has a real following of people that's probably as dedicated to that is as I am to a Stephen King novel. Part of the Stephen King novel, I will admit, is nostalgia for me, right? Because it came out when I was a kid. I saw the miniseries on TV with David Soul. It was probably out of not the first horror movie, if you want to call it a movie. It was a miniseries at first, and then they cut it down and tried to make a movie out of it. But definitely one of the early horror movies that I was allowed to watch as a kid. My mother, they liked horror movies as well. So I remember seeing Dracula in black and white probably as early as 4 or 5 years old. But then it was also one of the books of Stephen King that I read pretty early on. I think The Shining, and then Pet Cemetery, and then Salem's Lot. And I thought for a long time, this is why I liked that book when I read it when I was 13. Do I still like that book? And I went back about 2 years ago, I guess, um, and reread it. And you know what? I think I liked it better now than I did then. I appreciated it more. And it just solidified for me that books like The Shining, Salem's Lot were not just contemporary popular culture, pulp fiction kind of writing. It was Stephen King was really developing a style, and a style that I think will last. My least favorite book was From a Buick 8. It was one of those books that I just didn't get into, didn't feel it. And so, yeah, if it had been longer than what it was, I don't even know, I would have finished it. It just wasn't great for me. The second book of The Dark Tower, The Drawing of the Three, the first time I read it, which I was still pretty young when I was in my early 20s, maybe not even 20 yet when I read it, when it came out and I read it, I hated it. But I went back and I reread it about 4 years ago, and this was actually really good. So it's not like that. That's what I want to just make that comparison. This was a book that I read not long after it came out, from Buick 8, that is. And I just was not my favorite Stephen King book by a long shot.
Well, that's the thing about, you know, I doubt I'm the only one, but I read Rita Hayworth after I saw Shawshank Redemption,
Mm.
and it was so good. And as this is my interpretation, is that story was so good, they didn't really have to do much in writing a screenplay. It's all there. It's like the Green Mile too. So Green Mile is the same way. If you read the Green Mile, you feel like you're listening to the movie.
Yeah.
It's they include all of it,
Yeah.
and that's why those movies are so great. And that's a real testament to how great those stories are. That they were amazing, and they on this as a film, and it wasn't just the acting. Acting's great in those, but this what those movies provided was a movement, frankly. And it was kind of surprising in many ways for me to listen to the Green Mile, or read the Green Mile, and read Rita Hayworth and Shawshank Redemption, and go, wow, this is just the exact same
Yeah.
thing.
Well, even Stand By Me, as
Yeah.
a bringing the body to the screen, was such a well done movie. And And part of that is, for so long, the movies made from Stephen King novels and stories just didn't do them justice. Cujo was not my favorite Stephen King novel. I've read it, but he, I think it's one of the books that Stephen King talks about not remembering writing because he was during a time that he was really battling alcoholism and drug abuse in his life. But there's parts of that where, to build the suspense of what's happening between the mother and the son being trapped in the car with the rabid dog, that he goes off on where the dad is away trying to if you know the story, they're in advertising, and so he's away in New York on a business trip, and it just drags that out. And I think he does it intentionally to build suspense with getting you back to what's happening back at where the main storyline is taking place. And so I think some of his books are going to age well. They're going to age in a way that they're going to be even more popular and speak to an era, just like when we pick up a classic and we read about the 1800s. Charles Dickens wasn't writing the books that he wrote in order for them to be classics. He was writing those stories and selling them basically in magazines. Really, I mean, a lot of what was written was published in installations and periodicals, and it seemed to be a popular way to get print out to the public in those days. It's, St. Patrick's Day is coming up in March, and so I was thinking about Irish authors, and so the Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde.
That's a great story.
It is, and I read that like in high school, I think. Yeah, pretty sure I was in high school when I read that, and so I was like rereading it, and it's still like such a great book. But something in reading it, I was also reading the preface of the edition that I had, and I didn't realize that when he first published it, it published as a whole in that type of publication, like a magazine or journal, and it was only 13 chapters. And
it's not real long anyway.
Yeah, well, then the rewrite, it was really it got hit hard by the critics. And anyway, the book, if you read the book now, it's not 13 chapters, it's actually 20 chapters. Still not very long, but it's 20 chapters. He has a really interesting little preface that he wrote to The Picture of Dorian Gray, and it's actually a response to the critics that had given him a hard time about it. But that book is like still, if you read it in the context of how we are in our society, where we kind of live in this, glamour, everything's about beauty, everything's about, consumerism, and that book still reads well in today's society. And I don't think when Oscar Wilde wrote it, he was necessarily thinking, 200 years from now, people are still going to be reading my book. He was making a commentary on the world that he lived in. And so I think there are those books that we think of, oh, well, this is classical literature, or this is one of the classics. And then today, authors come out and they have this contemporary stamp on them. Well, yeah, because when the classics came out, they were contemporary at the time they came out as well. And so
classic music.
Yeah, exactly.
Classic music's from the 90s now.
Yeah. My kids like the 80s music. It is to them what the 60s was for me, So I had this out, the Where the Crawdads Sing. This book, my wife got it and was reading it, and I read it after her, thinking, oh yeah, I'll read it. I've heard some really good reviews on it, and I thought, oh yeah, I want to read it. I loved it, man. This was like the way in which Delia Owens writes and tells a story and develops characters. This is an example of one of those stories who each chapter is kind of alternating back and forth between the present and the past, and so it's kind of unfolding. And I like stories that, when I read books, I like books that do that.
Like with movies, do that too.
Yeah. Arundhati Roy's The God of Small Things. If you ever have you ever heard of that book? I read it when I was an undergrad, one of my literature classes, and really, really well written, powerful, disturbing story, and it's told in a fragmented way that as you start piecing everything together, it kind of unfolds, and it really great storytelling in my opinion as far as writing. But yeah, this was really awesome.
Have you read Harry Potter books?
Read the first one.
Okay, well, you've read one then.
I've read one. Yeah, I read the first one. I read the first one not long after it came out, actually. Yeah.
And have you read the original Pan and Wendy, Peter and Wendy, excuse me, the Peter Pan book?
Yeah, yeah.
Dark, right?
I
Yeah.
know. Yeah.
Um, he's killing off other lost boys because they're showing that they're no longer staying young like he was. And the backstory on that from the writer in terms of it being his brother who had died when he was young. Um, so, having read both of those, where do you think either one of those or both of those will be in the pantheon 50 years from now?
Oh wow. Yeah. So well, the Peter Pan has already was one of those examples that I mentioned has kind of stood some time already and lasted that, but is getting buried under the myth of Peter Pan, right? And so there's Hook and and like with Grimm's, right? The original Grimm's stories were pretty grim, and so they have been watered down and retold, and to the point that people today really don't know about the origin stories that the Grimms were collecting. And I think the Wendy and Peter Pan speaks to that in a way, or is victim of that in a way, because we I don't know I don't I guess we have come to a place where the storytelling in general can be a little watered down.
Well,
When you look,
anything good is going to get bastardized.
yeah, yeah, I think maybe that's a way to put it. But I
So,
was actually thinking of like thinking of reality TV. We used to have we talked about Lost on the last episode. It started off pretty well followed. It lost its viewing over the years because people didn't want to watch something that they had to think about. They wanted to come home at the end of the day, put something on, like reality TV, for example, where you don't have to think. There's not any philosophy to it. It's not making references to famous literature or classic literature. It's not leaving puzzles and clues for you to try to figure things out. It's
you just want to
just
relax your brain sometimes. And
right, yeah.
as far as
And you
Lost
can't.
goes, I'll say this. I don't remember what season it was, but when they started shifting around in time, it wasn't that I didn't want to think. It just didn't even make sense to me. But the first 3 or 4 seasons were amazing, especially that first one. That J.J. Abrams is awesome.
Really quality series now. We're not going for the 22 episodes in a season anymore. We're going for 10 or 12. Ozark. To me, have you watched any Ozark?
Every episode. Yeah. Final season's coming.
Man, and you look at like Jason Bateman's work in that is just so dramatic and so emotional. At the end of because I binge watched all the seasons. It's like Breaking Bad, right? I binge watched Breaking Bad when I broke my leg, and
You hadn't seen it before?
I hadn't seen it before that.
Oh, you're lucky you got to binge watch that show. Because
And then
I was that was one when it came on. I was watching it that night.
yeah,
Great show.
it's
Like
an
one
emotional.
bad episode, in my opinion. Of all the seasons, one bad episode. That's pretty good.
The amount of emotion that's required for you to bring to the table when you watch a show like that. So Ozark, I have Ozark in that kind of that same category. It draws a lot of emotion out of you. When I watch a series like that or a movie like that, it really draws me into it. And so I leave at the end of it, or turn the TV off at the end of it, just feeling drained.
Yeah. Well, yeah. a really good show will absorb you, right? And so if I'm pointing to, at least in the past 5 6 years of shows that really absorbed me, it was Haunting of Hill House
Oh yeah,
on
yeah.
Netflix. That
Yeah.
show consumed me while I was watching it.
It did us too. We really got into it. The Haunting of Hill House has all of these homages or nods to or tributes to Shirley Jackson's book. And if you've ever read that book, that's another great book.
Yeah.
March is also Women's History Month. So that's what all these books I have stacked up back here are all my favorite books written by women authors. And Shirley Jackson is definitely that. The Haunting of Hill House. It's probably one of my favorite horror stories, but it's not that it's scary, it's the psychological impact that it has.
Well, that's the thing. It's not a haunted house. It's
Right.
showing how haunted you are.
Yeah.
The depths that, and relatability even of how dark things can be, particularly based on events that have happened to you, was presented in a way that was not only relatable. I keep going back to the word of just consumed me, because even when I couldn't relate, it was so relatable.
Mhm.
And obviously very well done and well acted, but I couldn't look forward to anything more than the second season of that, not knowing where they were going to go. My initial response when I heard that was, I got a sequel to Haunting of Hill House, and it wasn't, which was good, because that would have been, I don't know, maybe they could have worked some magic, but they didn't even try, and I think that's fairly telling. I like the fact that there were some of the same actors, and it's good. I think it's not like going back to season 2 of True Detective, which, if they had just released a show and said, "Hey, this is a show that has Rachel McAdams and Vince Vaughn and Colin Farrell in it, and they're going to be doing some stuff," you'd go, "Oh, okay, well, I like this person, that person." But with it carrying the weight of the first season, it was, like you said, impossible.
Yeah.
And it didn't even come close to scratching the surface of being something that you wanted it to be. Like the third season, I think there was enough time, and it was also much better. It's very good, but it still is nothing like, it's really good.
Going back to
Okay, Peter Pan,
lasting, standing the test of time, then.
female authors, J.K. Rowling,
Yeah.
Harry Potter. Now's your moment.
I will tell you, I like the Harry Potter book that I read, the first one. And I think I would like to say I have two daughters who are huge fans of the Harry Potter books, the movies, uh, and I guess my oldest son too, for that matter. It was probably the Hunger Games and the Harry Potter books probably were what turned my son on to being a reader. We struggled for a long time to find books that, when he was really young in elementary, that he wanted to read or would commit to reading. And although I never told him this, I was sympathetic because when I was in elementary, I think I've shared that with you before too, that I wasn't into reading novels per se when I was a kid. I like to read articles and informational stuff, but I wasn't big into reading fiction. But those were books that really kind of pulled him in and got him into reading. So I'll always be appreciative of those because of that. I really enjoyed reading. Was it the Sorceress Stone? That's the first Harry Potter book, I believe. I really enjoyed reading it. It is young fiction, and so it was.
I'd
It
say
was.
it's like 12-year-old to 14-year-old ish kind
I,
of
I
book.
would, yeah, I would think so. Yeah, yeah, and especially the first one
I've read
because
some
I'm
of it
thinking
to the
that's probably
kids.
around the age that he's supposed to be in that particular novel. And I have never really, prior to the Dark Tower, I never saw myself as someone who really enjoyed reading serial novels. I'd read Green Mile that came out in the little serial editions, but those weren't novel after novel, right? Those that was a
Also the
serial.
story.
Yeah, exactly. So, and then with the Hunger Games, which I did read all three of those, I'm like, this is pretty good stuff. I like
Good
this.
female author.
Another female author. When you stop and you look at literature and you really start asking me about the books, the majority of, in my opinion, of the great literature that's out there, well, that's literature that's been written by women. Everything from, like I mentioned, Where the Crawdads Sing to The Secret History. I'm not huge into the style of writing like the Jane Austen books and things like that. I've read them. I read not read all of them, but I've read several of them. But I see how they were as popular as what they were at the time, and I see why they've stood
Yeah,
the test of time.
Jane Austen's. I mean,
Yeah,
even like I'm not a big fan either, but I get it.
yeah, exactly. But you take Lois Lowry, like
Love
The
her.
Giver and Count the Stars, and or is it Count the Stars? Number stars, Count the Stars. Yeah, that to me is especially for young adult. I'm not young adult, young kind of adolescent literature. To me, that's fantastic. I mean, The Giver. I've got a copy of The Giver there. I bet I've read The Giver 4 times at least, and every time I read it, it's like, wow, that's such a good book. Wasn't really pleased with the movie so much. Wasn't horrible, but I just wasn't really. Um,
Something I want to throw in too is that it's good to hear this because for I mean, like we still deal with not just misogyny but gender bias now, but there was a long time when women weren't even allowed to learn,
no,
let alone write books. If you want to talk about the fairer sex, we were talking about the fucking better sex in many ways. I mean, been oppressed for the longest time and proven time and time again a better as a whole. Not every woman is better than every man or anything, but as a whole to be better at leading, better at writing, uh, better at almost everything than guys.
well, here's an example. Harper Lee didn't write a ton of books, you know, but you say greatest American novel. Somebody is going to have To Kill a Mockingbird. Everybody, so say Harper Lee,
I'd be arguing
someone
that.
is going to have To Kill a Mockingbird in their top five. Everyone's going to know To Kill a Mockingbird. Uh, tell you somebody that was prolific that just blew my mind with almost every book that I read was Virginia Woolf.
Really?
Yeah, Waves, Orlando. You want to talk about a book that just really is a trip to read? Orlando is just amazing because the novel tells about the life of an individual through these 3 eras of existence. And the individual, Orlando, isn't always, sometimes it's he and sometimes it's she. She goes through these different phases. And there's not any real clue to why Orlando is the gender that he is, or she is, or in the era that he's or she is in at the time that the story's been told. So it's kind of this classical period, pre-modern and then modern, and so it's really a story about a human being, and it forces you into looking at it that way.
This is actually a good time to interject. I do think that there is a strong and fun conversation to be had about books that are going to stand the test of time and books that maybe aren't going to stand the test of time, or this book versus that book. And I want that to be something that we get into. Maybe is it worth even like its own little part. However, the reason that I really wanted to focus on these two is because I do think Peter Pan is obviously it's kind of a no-brainer. And I don't know if you know this, it's the first time that the name Wendy was ever used was in the Peter Pan book. And the reality behind the Harry Potter and the phenomenon precludes what we're kind of seeing now. And for me, I've really I think that it's very possible that the Harry Potter stuff is going to not even stand the test of the next 20, 30, 40 years because of what people are calling cancel culture.
Mm.
And, you know, J.K. Rowling, it, for whatever she has produced and as popular as she is, has lost a ton of fans based on her statements and I guess her thoughts on how you can define genders, which is not even part of the conversation in at least popular culture conversation when the first Harry Potter book came out. I mean, we're talking 20 something years ago, and this is a modern phenomenon that is in many ways canceling what has been turned into somewhat of a classic phenomenon, which was the Harry Potter books. And I'm not bringing this up to take a stand either way. I mean, I'll be honest that I feel like that the reaction to Rowling's views has been a little harsh and overblown for someone that I would think that on almost any other issue would align with a lot of the same people that have a problem with her. But it's going to be interesting, I think, to see how this all plays out and to potentially document um, noticing within this moment that possibility, because history is always written by the winners.
Mm.
And while it's a little different now, I mean, everybody gets a voice, which is a good thing, even if it can be in a wasteland like the internet sometimes. Um, it'll be interesting on if the simplicity around the stories of Harry Potter get buried due to gender politics.
Mm. It's an interesting take because I would say, well, first off, to go back, Harry Potter and what was originally the Philosopher's Stone came out in
90 something.
always, was it always Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone? Was that always the name of the book? Did I get that crossed up?
I think that's the book one is
Yeah,
the
yeah.
Philosopher's Stone.
Philosopher's Stone. So it came out in 1997 in the UK. It was released in 1998 in US, uh, which is the year my oldest son was born.
And by 2002 or 3, there were waiting parties at midnight for this book to get released,
Yeah.
which is something you only see like with phones and shoes and Jordan shoes and that kind of thing.
When I look at that style of um, adolescent, pre-adolescent, adolescent, emerging adult literature, if I wanted my kids to read any books, my mind usually goes immediately to Roald Dahl. I love Roald Dahl. He's like another one of those top authors, especially with that genre of literature. Just an amazing writer, in my opinion. Even now, when I read Roald Dahl, I feel like a kid again, in a sense. So it has that youthful quality to it. Harry Potter, and really it's a shame in a lot of ways because it is that book that will be the book that some kid who didn't like to read will pick up and enjoy reading. You know, I know it's very controversial. One of the great things about being a dad in this era of society is you get to have a lot of these conversations about these really things that really need a critical lens that you need to put under, in my opinion, you need to put under the scalpel and kind of dissect and look at in ways, because media today, you have media outlets not referring to themselves as the media, but referring to the other side's media as being the media and accusing them of putting out fake news when they themselves are putting out fake news. And the same thing is happening with this cancel culture, right? Anybody that speaks out about an opinion, you take somebody who is from one side of the aisle in politics, speak out against another person on that same side of the aisle, and then all of a sudden they've got a whole group of people trying to cancel them, and they are the ones who are saying the other side is trying to cancel us. And now here we are putting that to work against our own. And so this whole thing about cancel culture is, in my opinion, we failed as a society to teach ourselves and our young how to have democratic dialogue. We don't know how to have a democratic discussion where two people can have opposing ideas or even conflicting ideas or adversarial ideas without labeling that other person demonic or or, or the enemy. Go back to the anti-federalist and the Federalist Papers at the founding of our country that led up to what became our Constitution. And there were some heated debates and some really divided discussions that took place over the way that document should be written.
They
But
were
if
doing it face to face, though. That's the thing, is that nowadays civil discourse is secondary to your own empowerment, and that's one thing that I think is a culprit here, is that the internet doesn't punish you for being rude, doesn't punish you for trying to ruin someone, but it will ruin people.
right,
And the reason I think that this Harry Potter thing is the only reason that I would bring it up on a podcast about this kind of thing, is that it is about a book and it is about a time period, and like that first one came out in 98, and so this book set appealed primarily to millennials. And I'm gonna look right in the camera on this. Millennials, I love you guys, but you need to chill the fuck out, because they are ruining their own idols just because it's a reward. It feels like a reward, apparently, to them, to have stated to the cosmos, I am against what this person said or did, and I am only going to be right in this because I'm going to destroy you. And that's beyond uncivil discourse. That's not reality. This stuff is so much more nuanced than they're even allowing it to be.
yeah. On that note, with the millennials and loving them,
I do. I
I
love them.
do, and I also appreciate the very much needed discussion about social justice issues, and I know a lot of people don't like that phrase social justice, but I don't think they fully understand what it
I know
means.
what you mean. You know, I know what you mean.
Yeah, I know you know what it means. Fairness in a social setting. Let's put it that way. How about that? That's not social justice. That's just the truth about
Basic
living. That's
fairness,
just
right?
being fair to your fellow man in society and not being unfair based on arbitrary traits that we identify or slap labels on. But this is the thing about the J.K. Rowling. Do I agree with what J.K. Rowling said? No, I don't agree with what J.K. Rowling said about trans people. Ibram X. Kendi is an African American historian, author, awesome. Have you heard of Kendi? Wrote Step from the Beginning, How to Be an Anti-Racist. Uh,
Yes, yes. That I've seen. I haven't read that. Seen interviews. The anti-racist is such a good conversation to have, and it's one that gets lost in the mix of, I don't see color and that kind of
right.
thing. He's
Well,
great.
he says this. This is not me. This is coming from Kendi. He talks about this idea of people who are racist, and maybe they don't realize it, right? Maybe they grew up in a culture not far from where you and I did, where people had tendencies of looking at people of color differently. Maybe they weren't mean to them, but they looked at them differently. And so they think, well, I'm not mean to this person, but in my heart, I think I'm better than this person. Well, it's a good indicator that you're being racist because you think because of your skin color that you're better than this other person. But he talks about the need to give people who have racist ideas and racist thoughts the opportunity to wrestle with those thoughts. If that's what was happening with the tweet, and again, I'm like, you know what? Not everybody wants to know your thoughts. On one hand, nobody wants Nobody cares. If that's your opinion, that's your opinion. Opinions are not our rights, not in the sense of everybody's entitled to an opinion. That's what people like to say now. Yeah, everybody's entitled to a founded opinion. You can't just have an opinion that the sky is purple today and think, oh, everybody should know I think the sky is purple today.
You're not entitled to your own delusion.
That's one good way to put it. Yes. You have to say though that if I put something out there in a conversation, just like what you and I are having now, maybe putting it down and putting your thoughts out there is somehow therapeutic for some people. I think Twitter is a mess. If it's not the post itself, maybe it's the comments that follow. It is right. Like, what good is it doing? It's not
There's
doing
good in Twitter, but most of it is responded to with bad,
yeah.
And then also a lot of bad. That is a hellscape right there.
So, but let's put that aside. Say she said it in an interview, it would have got the same response probably had it been watched. So I'll say this though, that some of the things that I've said in my life have been moments at which I realized when I said that thing that I said that some growth was necessary. That now that I've said that and the words have come out of my mouth, now I realize wait a minute. Let me go back and let me rethink this thought that I had.
Growth is a great word, man.
Yeah,
great,
so
the growth word because it doesn't always have to come from a bad place. You simply may be ignorant, or you may simply have not had the time to recognize that all the things around you that have led you to say something in that way or whatever it is doesn't actually fully represent who you are simply because you haven't had that growth.
I've heard people talk about writings from the early 1900s where the author used the word savage. The author was using it to mean uncivilized. But this idea that, oh, if you use savage, it was automatically a derogatory term. Well, that's not the way that word is necessarily always implemented. Would it be different to say barbaric? Would it be different to say uncivilized? Would it be different to use any of those synonyms of that word and not convey the same thought? Today, we have seen language evolve, but the inability to see, oh, that in the context of what was written, this is what the author meant.
Even beyond what you're saying, and that's a good point about, the simple semantics of a word, triggering or, whatever it is that's getting that response. I think you point at Mark Twain. Mark Twain would have been canceled 100 times over. I think that anybody that's done any like actual research into who Mark Twain was, you'd realize he is not the person that you would point at and say was racist. Right. What he was doing was he was putting onto page what was authentic to that time and to the individuals that would have been speaking within that story. So I think that sometimes there needs to be a gut check on folks that are looking at things and recognizing, not necessarily, you don't have to excuse away behavior. And I'm not talking about Mark Twain at this point, but like, you don't have to excuse away behavior, but you do have to recognize what the context is, like something that's different. Like I love my grandmother. However, she said some things that I found to be rather problematic about a former first lady. And it was put to me of, well, she's just from a different time. She's from Alabama and she's from a different time. And for me, you say something that's about somebody's race that is an indictment one way or another. It doesn't really matter where you came from. At least I've yet to been able to get over that, because it strikes me as this is how you feel. However, there are totally some other contexts within that where if it had been, that's the only way that they've ever been presented, the way to share that information, it's just more complicated. I mean, like we talked about previously, what was it we talked about that one episode where things were just more, it was cults, how cults can be, I believe there are plenty of pure, very healthy cults. There's the cult of PlayStation and Xbox, and that's not really hurting anybody. It just kind of goes back to the whole conversation of if the role of people is to enjoy each other, hold each other accountable, where do we socially agree that lines are going to be drawn on individuals, particularly when you add in factors of some of us, not us, me or you, but some of us are held way more accountable because of success. Uh, I'm not going to get into the J.K. Rowling thing. I think in all likelihood, I disagree with a lot of the people I really like. I love the millennial generation as a whole. And, like Patrick Rothfuss, definitely one of my favorite authors. He's just written her off. And I don't get it. I just don't, because when I look at her stance, it doesn't, and I'm totally open to the idea that I'm missing something. And so you can throw it out there, anybody else can. But the way that I interpret it is not as though uh, being transgender or identifying in ways is bad. It's simply that being a female from birth is a reality and something that she's going to, I don't know about necessarily have pride in, but going to defend as something that is an experience that you can't have outside of being born a woman, having to menstruate, because that's an experience that whether you see yourself as a boy or a girl, born or identifying, is going to at least affect who you are. And so that's how I've always interpreted it with her. And it's definitely not enough for many people that she stands by that, because I think that's a strength that she doesn't just come out and apologize. She says, no, this is the way that I view it. And I realize that just in saying those kinds of things, that I'm potentially disconnecting myself with people as close as my sister, that I'm sure have stronger views that very well may likely disagree with mine. But that's kind of the point of putting this out there for me, is to say, uh, are you going to try and cancel me too because I happen to think that somebody is not necessarily right? I think that maybe J.K. Rowling is herself not willing to recognize the nuance well enough. I think there's flaws in what she's saying, but the idea that suddenly her stuff should all be banned, and so to try and return this back to, because this show is not a political show, and books are not inherently political generally, although you talked about your least favorite Stephen King. I know several good people that I like who have refused to even buy or collect any more of Stephen King because they don't like his politics. And they particularly didn't like Stealing Beauties, not just because his son was co-author, but it's a political conversation that some people don't agree with. Yeah. And, while, I certainly don't understand sides from time to time, I really find myself pushing against the idea of anyone being canceled based on something like you were pointing out, something they said. Anyway.
It goes back to what I was saying earlier. If I have an obstacle in my way that's keeping me from seeing someone's perspective, regardless of what side of the aisle I may fall on, or fall in the middle and get trampled, maybe, I don't know. If that obstacle is there, I need to have people allow me to wrestle with that obstacle. I need to analyze it. I need to look at it. I need to determine what I need to do, either to go over it or go around it, or realize that it was put there to save my life and keep me from going over a cliff. I don't know. But if I don't have this opportunity to wrestle with those thoughts or whatever that obstacle might be, that filter, that framework, whatever, I'll never get over it. I'll never understand it. Now, having said that, is it necessary for me to articulate the fine nuances of that obstacle in front of me out to the ether so everyone and their dog hears it? That's another thing. So
Yeah, you kind of asked for it.
yeah, so
Good point.
the part though that I have fear of is there are groups of people right now who believe things that are, in my opinion, very detrimental to democracy and to our own history.
Yeah, it's ugly.
Me being the person that I am, I'm trying to understand where everyone's coming from to some degree. And with that, I would say, if we don't provide people that space to work through those things, whatever it was, maybe these people have just been kicked around so much in society that the reality is something they don't want to deal with. So the delusions of that rabbit hole or whatever they are in, they find comfort there, and they've, if we can
I know
believe,
that's the case with some of them.
yeah,
And I've met them. They like they like Alex Jones. They like that kind of thing because any other story they feel like hurts them. Like even I've sat in there watching with somebody going, you know, this is bullshit, right? You're not believing this. They need it to be true.
yeah, it's like the judge that ruled on the Tucker Carlson thing that said, no one in their right mind believes that Tucker Carlson is legitimate. Though there are people who they think they need that,
I
or
mean,
else
he's
he
a
wouldn't still be.
major anchor on Fox News. I mean, that's a legitimate news station. I mean, well, okay, let me take a step back. It's presented as a legitimate news station. It's very big. Although it is true that they have argued in court that for I think it's 23 of the 24 hours, it's all editorials. There's
Yeah,
only 1 hour of actual news on that station, but it's Fox News. And while I have a problem with Fox News due to things outside of even Fox News, I also can point to and go, okay, this is a news station that has an agenda. And they all do. They all have a certain agenda, but this agenda is not necessarily even going to require that they be within the parameters of what's reality. And so, editorializing should just be opinion based on facts. And it's not just Fox News, but Fox News is a culprit of this of pushing a narrative and then having a bunch of people provide opinions on that narrative as though that narrative is based in reality.
right. So tying this into the J.K. Rowling thing,
Yeah.
this is what I like to push myself to do more of, or to recognize, I guess, is a better way to say it. Why we are so caught up in pointing out the lies of the other side. It's like, I've seen it now because of all this coming out about Andrew Cuomo, that they still let Chris Cuomo come online and talk. And well, first off, that's his brother. I don't really know how implicated he is in the wrongdoings or ethical dilemmas that
Could you imagine if they
Andrew finds
canceled
it.
Chris Cuomo because of his brother?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's some of Ducey, and some of them have even brought that up, of course. But this is the thing, though. So no matter where you're at, what I think we should be doing as a society, not only trying to meet the needs of every person in our society, and I say in our country, there are people in rural America that are in need. There are people in the inner city that are in need. And we get so caught up in demonizing the other side. We're too busy, you know, canceling each other out, we'll never have that conversation on why Marjorie Taylor Greene thinks the way she thinks. We think, well, it's delusional. But well, yeah, maybe it is delusional, but that doesn't matter. That delusion exists in her mind for a reason. And so why and where does that originate from? And maybe it's a political ploy.
He's an opportunist.
She's pandering to a group. Well, okay, then what about the people she's pandering to then? Let's talk about them. There's needs there that obviously at some point in our society either weren't being met or were being met, and they weren't being met in a way that was meaningful. That I think that happens sometimes. But if we don't have those moments where we in some media, whether it's Twitter, God forbid, or whether it's writing it down in a notebook, which I think is a little bit healthier. Putting it down in an article in a doctoral program might be the better way to wrestle with these things than putting it out there for all the world to see. But anyway, that's beside the point.
Everybody get on that.
Yeah, but a conversation though, right? A conversation between at least two people, a true dialogue, right? Two words, a dialogue between two people that even may have opposing views, being able to talk through that and in the process at least trying, maybe not succeeding, but at least trying to see where the other person is coming from, is that growth that I was talking about. So what she said was dehumanizing to trans people. If trans people felt offended by it, there is definitely something there that needs to be looked at, something needs to be questioned, something needs to be challenged. But challenge is spelled with some of the same letters, but it doesn't mean cancel. To challenge somebody's thought, we went through a doctoral program where we had our thoughts challenged constantly, but we saw it as opportunities of growth. Not everybody sees it that way.
Well, it's something that we learned in that program is that words have currency. And I think that's part of why this is sort of a broken system, is that J.K. Rowling is this isn't in a vacuum. Her words in that medium come with more currency than others, come with less than others too. But I think that's part of why the fight is there.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of the dialogue, it's not a dialogue. I put a statement out there, and if I'm a big deal, be ready for the hordes to come. I mean, it's the nature of the beast. Twitter, and it's not just Twitter, but Twitter is kind of leading the way on this, in my opinion, is built as a what was that called, the dome they fought in on Mad Max, Thunderdome. It isn't one-on-one, but everybody's out for themselves. And if there's anything that's driving anyone more than Schadenfreude, I can't tell what it is. If I can bring you down, I bring myself up somehow. And so, like, dialogue is hard. I mean, like, between, folks that know each other, have a program or something along those lines, creating a dialogue can be fairly simple. But in that medium, the internet and Twitter, it's not even trying to be a dialogue.
Well, cancel culture's ugly cousin, the troll culture, is definitely even another aspect of this, right? Where
I used to be a troll hunter.
Yeah, if you just even try to understand or join in a conversation, you could then be targeted just as quickly because of because it's perceived a certain way. The funny thing is that I've seen people who are these professional trolls in social media, and I don't get on social media nearly as much as I used to. And I try to keep it just for particular things that I follow, like some Spanish news outlets that I follow on Twitter now, some other people and some organizations that I follow that I try to keep up with. I do that through Twitter. Same way with Facebook now. Facebook for me is not necessarily anything any longer about social media. It's just a media platform where certain information is shared.
The only place to get it done. So I'm on Facebook for my HOA.
Right, exactly. That's a good example.
That's the thing, is that a troll doesn't exist to further dialogue. They exist because they can't have dialogue. They exist because they don't have anything to bring to the table other than to try and bring you down. And because of it's such a never land of communication, people engage. Like, the best thing to do, it's just like with a bully, is just ignore them. But that's why I would basically, when I'd go online, I'd put my battle axe on and just start troll hunting, because that would actually feel rewarding, because these folks are assholes. They're just there to make other people feel bad about their feelings, opinions, that kind of thing. And so, I'd search it out, and I would just start giving them the business. Trolling the trolls is what I used to call it.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I applaud that, because I've done some of that before myself.
It wasn't actually very rewarding, and I'm glad.
Yeah. Well, the thing about it is, neither of these phenomena are beneficial to dialogic discussion, democratic discussion. And I know people like to split hairs on, well, we're not a democracy, we're a republic. Well, look up the Latin word republic, and look up the Greek word democracy, and come back and we'll have a discussion then. But in the matters of the public, or in the matters of the people, versus ruled by the people, it's a fine line to try to draw there. In a republic such as what we have, the democratic foundations of debate, discussion, dialogue, discourse. I read an article a couple of years back on how adversarial now means the enemy. And so you can't have any kind of adversity without the person who's being adverse being seen as the enemy. And in the paper that I read, she was talking about how that's sad that we've lost that used to be a part of our society, this ability to debate one another and even to disagree, but yet to somehow either grow from, or see where our argument was weak, or to see where our argument was stronger, or whatever. We don't have that anymore, and I'm really afraid that we're losing that. So, do I agree with everything that J.K. Rowling said in her tweet? No, but do I see this as a person who is wrestling with some views that, even though they may not be right, challenging someone's opinion and getting them to see a different side is not the same as saying, "Oh, we're going to ban your art." That's a whole different discussion right there.
It seems really narcissistic of a group to put out there that other people should no longer enjoy these things by certain people because they disagree with them on this over here.
I think that's kind of what I was getting at.
Yeah, it just strikes me as really presumptuous, if nothing else. We've gotten off book topic, which I think is okay.
Hope you liked our discussion today. If you really enjoyed the video, be sure to like and subscribe.
Like and subscribe. Like and
Sometime.
I'll talk to you later, man.
All right, man. Take care.
Bye.